March 12, 1945. 2:11 a.m., somewhere east of the Rhine. The barn smells like wet hay, diesel, and old manure. The air is cold enough to sting the lungs. A lantern hangs from a beam, the flame pulled sideways by drafts that slip through the boards. In the center of the floor, an American soldier sits on his knees, with his hands tied behind him. His name is Staff Sergeant Daniel Mercer, 28 years old, infantry. Mud on his trousers, blood dried black along the collar of his jacket, where a medic had run out of bandages hours ago. Around him, 21 men in white winter smocks watch in silence. SS guards. Their boots leave dark prints in the straw, rifles held low, relaxed, like this is routine, like they have done it all winter. Outside, the forest is moving. Not the trees, the war. American artillery murmurs far off, deep and slow, like doors being shut in the distance. Somewhere closer, a tank engine revs and dies again. The night keeps breathing. One of the guards steps forward and nudges Mercer's shoulder with a boot. A test. A reminder. Mercer doesn't flinch. A second guard raises a flashlight and tilts Mercer's face toward the light. The beam catches his eyes. Mercer smiles. Not a grin, not bravado, just a small, private expression, like he heard a joke only he understood. The guards glance at each other. They have seen fear. They have seen anger. They have seen men beg. They have seen men collapse. They have not seen a prisoner smile at them like this. An SS NCO walks in from the doorway, tall and sharp-faced, a submachine gun hanging from his shoulder. He says something in German that Mercer does not understand. The tone makes it clear it is not a question. Mercer answers anyway, in calm English. He keeps smiling. The SS NCO steps closer. He leans down and grabs Mercer by the chin, turning his face side to side like he's inspecting livestock. The lantern light glints off a ring on the man's finger. The metal looks almost black in the dim. Mercer's smile does not move. The NCO's mouth tightens. He says something again, louder. The guards stiffen. A few of them shift their rifles. The barn feels smaller. Mercer takes one slow breath through his nose. And then, like he is remembering something pleasant, he laughs. It isn't loud, it isn't wild. It's a short, quiet sound that shouldn't exist here. Not in a place like this, in a moment like this. The SSNCO freezes. The guards look at each other again, uncertain, like the script they're used to has been stolen out of their hands. For a second, the power in the room wobbles. What happens next will take less than a minute. In 45 seconds, 21 guards will be dead or dying in the straw. Mercer will walk out of that barn alive, and the men who find the scene afterward, American soldiers pushing through the trees at dawn, will stand in the doorway and stare at the bodies like they've walked into a story that cannot be true. But you cannot understand that moment unless you understand what came before it. Because people do not do things like this for no reason. They do them because the war teaches them the shape of certain choices, and then it corners them into making one. Daniel Mercer was born in 1916 in a small Ohio river town where the factories ran day and night and the smoke settled on the windowsills like gray snow. His father worked steel. His mother kept the house running on whatever money was left after the company store took its share. Mercer grew up in a world where men didn't talk much. They fixed what broke. They put food on the table. They kept moving, even when their hands hurt. By 18, he was tall and strong, but not loud about it. People trusted him because he listened, because he didn't waste words, because when things went wrong, he didn't panic. He got to work. He married young, a girl from the next street over. They had a son before he was 22. Life was simple, not easy. The Depression sat on everything like weight. Then the world started burning overseas. By 1942, the war was no longer a headline. It was a draft notice. It was rationing. It was men leaving town in uniforms and coming back different, if they came back at all. Mercer reported to induction with a wedding ring on his finger and a photo of his son in his wallet. He was 26. The army wrote down his height and weight, watched him do push-ups, asked him if he had any special skills. He did not. He had the kind of strength that doesn't show up on forms. They trained him in Georgia, red clay, heat, long marches that ground the skin off the heels, rifle drills until the motions lived in the bones, night exercises where you learned how quickly you could become lost, how easily the mind could invent shapes in darkness. Mercer learned two things that mattered. First, that fear is not an emergency. It is information. Second, that most men, under pressure, stop thinking. They wait to be told what to do. Mercer did not stop thinking. He shipped out in early 1944. England first, like so many of them, a damp island full of troops and trucks and airfields. He spent months training for an invasion that everyone knew was coming and nobody could describe without superstition. Then, Normandy. The first time Mercer saw France, it was through smoke and rain and the blur of motion as landing craft slammed into the shore. Men around him vomiting from nerves, from seasickness, from the smell of cordite and fuel. The beach was loud in a way no training range could imitate. Not just gunfire, the sound of men shouting for medics, the sound of bodies hitting water and not getting back up. Mercer survived because he kept moving. Not heroically, not with speeches. He moved because standing still meant dying. That summer became a series of broken villages and hedgerows that turned every field into a trap. You learned quickly that you could be killed from a place you couldn't see by a man you'd never meet. You learned to read the small things, a window that was too dark, a fence line with no birds, a doorway with fresh footprints in the dust. Mercer started as a rifleman. By August, he was leading men older than him because the man who used to lead them had been hit in the throat and bled out before anyone could stop it. Leadership in combat is not confidence. It is clarity. Mercer gave his squad one thing they could hold on to, a plan that made sense, spoken in a voice that didn't shake. By the fall, he had been wounded once and refused evacuation. Not because he was fearless, because he knew what happened when the wrong man took over. Confusion, hesitation, men dying for nothing. In December, the weather turned and the war changed shape. Snow came early. The kind of snow that turned roads into white channels and made the forests feel endless. The kind of cold that jammed weapons and made fingers useless. And with the cold came stories. Not rumors, not propaganda. The kind of stories soldiers pass down in low voices because they need other men to know what the world has become. Prisoners shot after surrender. Wounded finished off in the snow. Entire squads disappearing after being captured. Some of it was chaos. Some of it was revenge. Some of it was the SS doing what the SS did. Mercer heard the name Malmedy like everyone else did. He heard the details second-hand, and the details were bad enough. Americans herded into a field. Hands up, weapons down. Then the sound of machine guns. After that, something hardened across the line. Men stopped talking about capture as if it were a neutral possibility. It became a different word. It became an ending. Mercer didn't make speeches about it. He didn't swear oaths in front of other men. He just made a decision privately, the way he made decisions. If it came down to it, he would not be taken alive. By March 1945, the Germans were collapsing. Not everywhere at once. Collapsing like an old building collapses. Floors falling, walls still standing, people inside still fighting because they don't know what else to do. Mercer's unit pushed into a stretch of forest cut by frozen streams and narrow roads, the kind of terrain that turns every movement into a guessing game. Orders were simple: probe forward, locate enemy positions, keep pressure on retreating units, take prisoners when possible. Then the patrol went wrong. A wrong turn at the edge of a clearing, a machine gun that opened up from a position nobody had spotted, a burst of fire that cut the air into pieces. Mercer hit the ground and crawled by instinct. He shouted commands. His men tried to move. 2 of them did not get up again. The Germans didn't fight like a retreating army. They fought like a cornered one. When Mercer looked back, he saw white smocks moving between trees. Fast, disciplined, silent. SS. The word changes the temperature of a battlefield. Not because they were superhuman, because they didn't behave the same way other soldiers did. They were more willing to shoot first, less willing to accept surrender, more willing to make a point. Mercer's squad was pinned, ammunition running low, radio dead, snow swallowing sound. He could have tried to break out. He could have run and left men behind. Instead, he did what he always did. He kept thinking. He signaled his men to pull back in small bounds, one at a time. He stayed last, firing short, controlled bursts to keep heads down. When the last man disappeared into the trees, Mercer turned to follow. That's when the rifle butt hit him behind the ear. The world tilted. He tasted blood. He felt snow against his cheek. He tried to roll, and a boot slammed into his ribs. Someone shouted in German. The sound was sharp, confident. Mercer's hands were yanked behind him. Rope bit into his wrists. A flashlight flashed across his face. White smocks all around him. SS. They dragged him through the woods like a sack of grain. By the time the barn came into view, Mercer understood something simple. This was not a normal capture, and whatever happened next would be decided quickly. Because in this kind of war, with this kind of enemy, you did not get many minutes. You got seconds. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you got an opening. Part 2. The barn. They keep Mercer on his knees. The rope around his wrists is tight enough to make his fingers go numb. Straw presses into his shins. The barn floor is uneven, warped by years of animals and rot and cold. Every breath carries the smell of old manure and oil. The SS guards move with familiarity. Rifles are leaned against posts. Helmets come off. One man pours something from a canteen and drinks slowly, watching Mercer over the rim. This is not an execution site. Not yet. This is a holding place. Mercer counts them without moving his head. 21. Most are young. Late teens, early 20s. A few older NCOs. They're relaxed in the way men are when they believe the situation is already decided. That's dangerous. The NCO who entered earlier moves to a crate near the wall and sits. He pulls a cigarette from a pack, taps it twice against his thumb, lights it from the lantern flame. He exhales smoke and looks at Mercer like he's trying to solve a small puzzle. He speaks again. Short sentences, German, clipped and precise. Mercer does not answer. The NCO frowns and switches to broken English. Name. Mercer stays quiet. Unit. Still nothing. The NCO sighs and gestures to one of the guards. The guard steps forward and strikes Mercer across the face with the flat of his hand. The sound echoes inside the barn. Mercer's head snaps sideways. He tastes blood. A tooth cuts his lip. He keeps his balance. The guard looks disappointed. Another question. Louder now. Angrier. Mercer lifts his head and meets the man's eyes. He smiles again. This time, it isn't accidental. The NCO stiffens. He leans forward. His voice rises. A guard laughs quietly behind him, the sound sharp and ugly. Mercer understands none of the words, but he understands the rhythm. He understands they want him afraid, and he understands something else. They have already decided what to do with him. That knowledge changes things. Fear, when it has nowhere to go, becomes something else. Focus, timing, calculation. Mercer lets his shoulders sag slightly, just enough to look tired, just enough to look beaten. The NCO stands and walks closer. He reaches down and grabs Mercer by the hair, jerking his head back. "Look," he says in English, tapping Mercer's chest with a finger. "Look." Mercer looks. The NCO smiles thinly, satisfied. This is how it's supposed to go. Then Mercer laughs again. This time it's louder. The sound fills the barn and sits there, wrong and exposed. The NCO recoils half a step. His expression flickers, not fear, but irritation mixed with confusion. The guards shift. One of them mutters something under his breath. Prisoners don't do this. The NCO snaps a command. A guard reaches for Mercer's rifle, which has been propped against a beam nearby, and lifts it. The NCO takes the rifle and tosses it to another man, who inspects it casually, working the bolt. The NCO steps back in front of Mercer and draws his pistol. He doesn't raise it yet. He lets it hang at his side, visible. A message. Mercer keeps smiling. Inside his head, the noise fades. He notices small things. The lantern sways slightly when someone moves too fast. The floor near the door is darker with tracked-in snow. 3 rifles are leaning together near the left wall, muzzles crossed. A submachine gun hangs from a peg behind the NCO, sling loose. He files it all away. The NCO raises the pistol now and presses it against Mercer's forehead. The barrel is cold. "Enough," he says in English. "Enough now." Mercer breathes out through his nose. This is the moment. Not because of the gun, because of what comes after. Mercer knows the pattern. He has seen it in villages, in forests, in ditches filled with snow. Interrogation ends when it stops being useful. After that, men disappear. Mercer laughs again. Not because it's funny, because laughter does something fear cannot. It disrupts. The NCO shouts. He draws his pistol back slightly, preparing to strike Mercer with it. That movement is the opening. Mercer lunges. He does not stand. He does not rush. He drops sideways, throwing his weight against the NCO's legs. The pistol fires. The round slams into a beam overhead, showering dust and splinters. Mercer hits the ground hard and rolls. Straw fills his mouth. A guard shouts. Another fires instinctively, the bullet snapping into the barn wall. Mercer reaches the peg. His hands are still bound. He grabs the hanging submachine gun by the receiver and rips it down, tearing the sling free. A guard tackles him from the side. Mercer slams backward into a post, using the impact to smash the man's head against the wood. The guard goes limp. Mercer scrambles, still on his knees, dragging the weapon with him. The NCO is shouting orders now. Panic sharpens his voice. Boots pound. Rifles scrape against wood. Mercer brings the submachine gun up with both hands and pulls the trigger. The weapon chatters. The sound is deafening in the enclosed space. Muzzle flashes strobe the barn, freezing faces in bursts of white light. The first burst cuts down the NCO at chest level. He jerks backward, the pistol flying from his hand, and collapses against the crate. Mercer pivots, firing in short, controlled bursts. He doesn't spray wildly. He doesn't chase targets. He shoots the men closest to the weapons. One guard drops his rifle and screams, clutching his leg. Another spins and falls without a sound, helmet rolling away. Mercer keeps moving. A rifle cracks. A bullet tears through Mercer's sleeve, grazing his arm. He doesn't feel it. He fires again. The barn fills with smoke and screaming. Men collide in the narrow space, slipping on straw and blood. Orders overlap and die unfinished. Mercer reaches the rifle pile and kicks them over with his boot, sending weapons skidding across the floor. A guard charges him, bayonet fixed. Mercer steps inside the thrust and fires once at point-blank range. The man collapses into him. Mercer shoves the body aside and turns. The weapon clicks. Empty. Mercer drops it instantly and grabs a fallen rifle, ripping it from a dead man's hands. He works the bolt as he rises. Two guards are trying to reach the door. Mercer fires. One falls. The other stumbles and disappears outside, screaming. Inside the barn, the shooting slows. Men are down everywhere, some not moving, some crawling, some crying out. Mercer moves methodically now, breathing hard, weapons steady. He fires when he has to. When it ends abruptly. 45 seconds. That is all it takes. 21 guards entered the barn. No one leaves it standing. Mercer stands alone, chest heaving, blood dripping from his arm onto the straw. The lantern swings wildly now, throwing shadows that jerk and twist like living things. He looks at his hands. They are shaking. He forces them still. Outside, the forest has gone quiet again. The war breathes. Mercer steps over bodies and pushes through the barn door into the cold. Snow crunches under his boots. He moves into the trees without looking back. Part 3. The Aftermath. Mercer does not run. He walks. That decision matters. Running makes noise. Running draws fire. Running tells the world you are afraid. Mercer moves at a steady pace through the trees, boots finding the frozen ground by feel. He keeps to the shadows, keeping the barn behind him, keeping the wind in his face. His arm burns now. The adrenaline is draining out, leaving pain in its place. Blood has soaked into his sleeve and stiffened in the cold. He ignores it. He counts his steps. He listens. Behind him, there are no shots, no shouting, no pursuit. That is when he knows. They are all dead, or too wounded to follow. Mercer moves deeper into the forest, angling downhill toward where he knows the American line should be. The terrain slopes gently here, broken by shallow gullies and deadfall buried under snow. The moon is thin, giving just enough light to separate trees from open ground. He stops once to tear a strip from his undershirt and tie it tight around his arm. The knot is sloppy. His fingers are numb. He tightens it anyway. The war is not over just because one fight is. Twice, he drops flat as movement flickers in the distance. Once it's a deer. Once it's a pair of German soldiers moving the other direction, hunched and exhausted, not looking for trouble. Mercer lets them pass. By the time the sky begins to thin toward grey, his legs feel heavy. His mouth is dry. His hands are steady again. That steadiness tells him he is still alive. He hears voices before he sees them. English. Low. Controlled. A challenge word carried softly through the trees. Mercer stops, raises one hand slowly, rifle held low in the other. "American," he says. "Don't shoot." A shape emerges between the trunks, then another. Helmets, white breath. A rifle trained on his chest. The soldier squints at him. "Jesus Christ," the man says. "Where the hell did you come from?" Mercer lowers the rifle and lets it fall into the snow. His knees finally give. He sits down hard, back against a tree. "Barn," he says, "about half a mile back." They bring him in cautiously. Too cautiously. That tells Mercer how he looks, blood-stained, alone, coming out of German territory at dawn. They search him. They bind his arm properly. They give him water. When he tells them what happened, nobody interrupts. They don't laugh. They don't argue. They just look at him. A lieutenant sends a squad to check the barn. They move out fast, rifles up, expecting resistance. Mercer watches them go, then stares at the snow until his breathing slows. He doesn't sleep. An hour later, the squad comes back. They don't say much either. One of them vomits behind a tree. The lieutenant pulls Mercer aside. 21? He asks quietly. Mercer nods. SS? Mercer nods again. The lieutenant exhales slowly. We'll need statements. Mercer shrugs. I'll tell it again. They move him to the rear, a field dressing station, then a proper aid post. A doctor stitches his arm without anesthesia because there isn't any left. Mercer does not flinch. By midday, the report has moved up the chain. A captured American. SS involvement. Enemy dead. No American witnesses inside the barn. That last part bothers people. Not because they doubt Mercer, because it makes the story difficult. Stories like this are supposed to have symmetry. Fire teams, witnesses, clean diagrams drawn in pencil on clipboards. This one does not. The officer who interviews Mercer asks the same questions 3 times, in different orders. Why did you smile? Why did you laugh? Why did you attack instead of complying? Mercer answers honestly. I knew what came next, he says, and I didn't want it. That answer gets written down. It gets underlined. By evening, the Germans are gone from the area. Not pushed out, evaporated. Units dissolving, men shedding uniforms, the war losing shape by the hour. The barn stays where it is. American soldiers avoid it. Someone hangs a poncho over the door. The story spreads anyway. Not fast, not like propaganda. It spreads the way real stories do, through mouths, through pauses, through the look a man gives another man before saying, "You hear about this?" A prisoner. SS guards. No witnesses. 21 dead. The numbers never change. Mercer does not correct anyone. He does not add details. He does not subtract. He goes back to his unit 2 days later with his arm bandaged and his gear replaced. The men look at him differently now, not with awe, with space. They give him room. That is what men do when they do not know how to speak to someone who walked through something they cannot imagine. The war ends 6 weeks later, not with one clean moment, with paperwork, with roads full of refugees, with prisoners stacked behind wire, with men waiting to be told where to stand next. Mercer survives the end the same way he survived the fighting, quietly. He ships home in the summer of 1945. He steps off a train into a town that looks the same and feels smaller. His son does not recognize him at first. His wife does. He does not tell the story. Not to neighbors, not to co-workers, not even to his boy when the questions come later. When the army contacts him about statements and citations, he cooperates. He answers questions. He signs forms. He does not attend ceremonies. The recommendation moves slowly. It changes shape as it passes through hands. Language becomes formal. Emotion is removed. Numbers are verified. Captured. Surrounded. Engaged enemy. Killed or wounded 21. The SS designation stays. That matters. In the end, the citation is approved quietly. No press release, no headline, just another piece of paper filed in a war that produced millions. Mercer receives his decoration months later in a small room with a flag behind a desk. A colonel reads from the citation. His voice is flat, professional. Mercer stands at attention and listens. When it's over, he shakes hands and leaves. The medal goes into a drawer. Life resumes. He works construction for a while, then a factory, then a supervisor's position when his back starts to ache too much for heavy labor. He raises his son, pays his bills, attends church sometimes, not out of devotion, out of habit. The war fades, but it does not disappear. Every so often, someone will hear the story and ask him if it's true. Mercer never embellishes. "Yes," he says, "that's what happened." Nothing more. Years later, when historians try to track down details, they find the barn location inconsistent across reports. They find names misspelled. They find units already disbanded. They argue quietly. Could one man really do this? Could 21 trained soldiers really lose control that fast? Veterans do not argue. They nod. They have seen how quickly order collapses when leadership vanishes, how panic spreads faster than gunfire, how the wrong emotion at the wrong second can break everything. Mercer never gives lectures, never writes a book, never appears in documentaries. He does not want to be remembered for killing. He wants to be remembered for surviving. He dies in the early 1990s. Cancer. Ordinary. A disease that does not care about medals or wars. At his funeral, there are no speeches about the barn. Just family, just names, just dates. The war, officially, has been over for almost half a century. But the lesson it taught him remains. And it is the same lesson that appears again and again in stories like this. Not about strength, not about aggression, about thinking, about timing, about what happens when a man refuses to behave the way his enemy expects. Part 4. What the smile meant. When people hear the story later, they focus on the wrong detail. They focus on the killing, on the number, on the speed, on the idea that one man wiped out 21 guards in less than a minute. That part is easy to misunderstand. The harder thing to understand is the smile. Because the smile was not courage. It was not bravado. It was not defiance in the way movies like to sell defiance. It was something smaller and more dangerous. It was refusal. War teaches patterns. Men raise their hands, men lower their eyes, men comply when the gun comes out. Armies depend on these patterns. They train for them. They expect them. Entire systems of control are built on the assumption that fear will move people in predictable ways. The SS relied on that assumption. They had learned it across Europe, in villages and forests and cellars, in moments when prisoners broke, begged, cried, complied. They knew how those moments were supposed to go. The smile broke the pattern. For a few seconds in that barn, the guards were no longer sure who was in control. Their prisoner was not behaving correctly. The situation no longer fit the script they had memorized through repetition. That hesitation mattered. In combat, hesitation is not neutral. It is lethal. Daniel Mercer did not overpower 21 men through strength. He did not win through superior weapons or numbers. He did not rely on luck. He relied on the brief vacuum created when authority failed to assert itself. The laugh widened that vacuum. The smile made it personal. The first shot did the rest. This is why stories like this rarely survive intact. They do not fit cleanly into narratives about bravery or sacrifice. They are uncomfortable. They suggest that survival sometimes comes from bending the rules, not following them, from thinking sideways instead of forward. They suggest that war is not decided only by weapons or plans, but by psychology under pressure. And psychology is hard to meddle. In the official paperwork, Mercer's action is reduced to language that sounds almost polite. Engaged the enemy, neutralized opposition, exhibited extraordinary valor. None of that captures the moment when a man kneeling in straw realized that obedience would kill him faster than action. None of it captures the absurdity of laughter echoing off barn walls while armed men froze, confused by something they had not trained for. Those details survive only in memory, and memory fades. That is why most people will never hear this story. They will learn names that fit better on monuments, stories that end cleanly, battles with clear lines, and heroes who behave the way heroes are expected to behave. They will not hear about the man who smiled at his captors, because smiling was the only way to take control of a moment that was otherwise already over. That is the quiet truth of combat. It does not reward size. It does not reward anger. It does not reward fearlessness. It rewards the ability to keep thinking when fear demands surrender. In that barn, Daniel Mercer had already lost, according to the math. Captured, surrounded, outnumbered, isolated, unwitnessed. Any rational calculation pointed to the same outcome. But war is not solved by math alone. It is solved by moments when someone refuses to behave as expected. 45 seconds later, Mercer walked back into the trees, alive. 21 guards did not, and the war continued on without pausing to take note. That is how most real stories end, not with applause, not with speeches, but with a man walking away from a place he should have died, carrying something he will never fully explain, and living the rest of his life quietly, because the moment that defined him was never meant to be repeated, only understood.